Another one of my students, after the year after he was in my class, he and his brother, they're from Nigeria. They went to go to Nigeria, and it was their first time flying in an airplane. And this video, to this day, I still have it saved. It's like, I will never ever get rid of this video. He filmed the takeoff from the flight from Fort Lauderdale, and he was talking to me as if I was sitting next to him in the seat by him. And he was talking just like I do in the videos, where I'm like, we're taking off, we're getting, and he was asking me questions in his video, and I can hear the excitement in his voice, along with his brother who was next to him.
Hi everyone. Today I am in conversation with the lovely Trisha De Pasquale. Trisha is an early childhood educator. She's got 17 years of experience, and she has a passion for bringing the world into classrooms, which is so interesting. Combining her love for teaching with her personal travel experiences, Trisha has created unique programs like Passport Adventures and American Adventures that are designed to take children on an imaginary journey across the globe and through the US. And through her interactive lessons, she actually helps students and teachers explore different cultures and places, sparking curiosity and creativity. Thank you so much for joining me today, Trisha.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Happy to be here.
You're probably just finished work and getting onto a conversation with me. So thank you. I know how at the end of the day it can be quite, you just want to put your feet up. But no, but
Normally I do, yes, but I've been looking forward to this interview all day. So I've been looking forward to it. So
thank you. I've been looking forward to it as well. So let's just dive straight into it. Could we just get a little bit on your background, Trisha? Which part of, are you originally from the US? If not, which part of the world do you come from? Just a little background on you would be great.
sure. I grew up in Michigan, so from the US, born and raised, lived there, attended my university in Chicago during when I was 18, between the ages of 18 and 22. And then I married my husband, Robert, who lives down in Florida. So after we got married, I moved down here, but down here in South Florida. But I come from a family full of teachers. And so it was what I saw growing up. My mom's a teacher, my sister is, my brother-in-law, and just different cousins and stuff. And so I just knew that I wanted to be a teacher someday. And so 17 years later, here I am. But I love traveling around the world. I had opportunities to do my student teaching my last semester of university. I went overseas and taught at an international school in Shanghai. And that experience is really what kind of fueled my desire, my passion for teaching kids about the world.
And what keeps your passion for teaching alive? Because you've been doing it for 17 years now. And now I understand that you have a background of a family of teachers. Sometimes that can be a deterrent, and a lot of people would want to do something different because they don't want to follow the tradition, so to speak, of the family, but did. So, what actually keeps your passion for teaching alive?
Teacher burnout right now is a huge thing. Anybody that was a teacher before the pandemic in 2020, and then a teacher through that, and now on the other side after it, has definitely experienced teacher burnout, where it's a tough job for sure. But honestly, my students are my driving force each day for wanting to go into work and teaching them just about the world. I see how their eyes just light up, and I see how our conversations change from the beginning of the year, where they just are learning, and they have so much that they need to learn, and then I see them throughout the years transform into the little humans that they are, and I just see how excited they are for learning, and just they're the reason why I keep doing it. Every year I get a new batch of students that I get to work with and shape and help, and it's just a rewarding experience. But teacher burnout is a thing. If you do know a teacher, definitely check in on them and see how they're doing, making sure that they're prioritizing their health, mental health, physical health, all of those things too, because you definitely can't just teach and then that's all you do. You definitely have to find a balance in between work life and home life. So trying to keep a balance of everything, but then also just seeing the way my students' eyes light up when they're learning, like that really just keeps me motivated, keeps me wanting to do more.
So I wanted to know how you integrate your personal travel experiences into the lessons that you make, so that you've just mentioned that the age group is like 5 to 6. And
Mhm.
to engage children that young, it must be quite interesting. And that's where I want to understand how you bring in your personal travel experiences into the lesson so that it just becomes engaging, fun, a way for them to learn.
Growing up, I was always fascinated by traveling. I remember when I was 6 or 7 years old, my family took a road trip. We drove from Michigan down to Texas to visit cousins. And I remember my dad showing me a map of the US, and he showed me all of the states that we were going to drive through. And it just blew my mind that we could travel through so many different states and see so many different places. And so that was a trip that really stuck out with me when I was little. And as I grew up and was attending university, knowing that I was going to become a teacher someday, I started to get more opportunities to do traveling on my own. So my family, the very first time I ever flew, I was 19 years old. So when people tell me now, oh, I'll never be able to travel like you, I just like, it wasn't until I was 19 when I first went on an airplane. But when I was 19 and in university, my family, we went over to Europe. And so we went to Europe and we visited 8 different countries there. And my eyes just started getting open to the world. I thought it was fascinating that in Europe you could be in 2 or 3 different countries all within an hour. It was just fascinating to me, just how you could do that. And so I started thinking at the time just about how, wow, these experiences are amazing. And then it was my last semester of college when I was able to live in Shanghai and teach. And I was working with kids who they were from all over the world. It was an international school that I worked at. And so my students were from 15 or so different countries. And so conversations just about time zone, jet lag, all these things. So spring breaks, like my students were vacationing in Egypt and in Australia on their spring breaks. And it was just so fascinating to me, just knowing and hearing kids talk about traveling the world at those ages that they were. And those students I taught were about 7 and 8 at the time. And so that really got me thinking, just wow, if these kids who are over here living internationally are able to have these experiences and this knowledge about the world, why can't we share that with other kids back in the States or back wherever it is that you're from? And so I graduated as I finished my student teaching in Shanghai, and then I returned back to the States, married my husband, like I mentioned, and then I started teaching a classroom of my own down here in Florida. And so I started taking the lessons that I had learned from my time in Shanghai, started teaching those with my own students. So I was over there for the Chinese New Year. And so we had just seeing the Chinese New Year celebration over there was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. Picture this, for 2 weeks straight, all throughout the night, there are fireworks going off in every single direction. It was just a fascinating experience to be able to witness and be a part of. They don't do that now, though, with all the Chinese, with all the pollution and stuff. I've heard that they've cut it back. But anyways, I just wanted my students here in the US to learn about, hey, this is the Chinese New Year, and this is how they celebrate it, and this is why. And so every year I just started with that. I just started doing the Chinese New Year unit with my class. They knew that I was going to decorate my classroom with Chinese souvenirs that I had brought home. And they were the ones that I really could credit to this day for being what I am now as far as teaching kids about the world. If those kids did not want to learn about the Chinese New Year and did not want to participate in that lesson, I probably just would have said, forget it. Let's just not even bother. Let's just do the normal curriculum, just teach them the basics, what's in the textbooks. But because they loved it, they loved learning about the world. That was really why I just kept adding more and more each year. And one year, so my sister and my brother-in-law lived in Shanghai for about 18 years or so, 18, 19 years. And so every year, then it became a tradition where I would go on FaceTime with my class and with my brother-in-law who was in Shanghai. And so then that helped my students learn about different time zones. And so again, they thought it was fascinating because he was 12 or 13 hours ahead of us in the States. And my students then got to understand that while it was daytime for us, it was nighttime for him. And so they just were fascinated by that fact too. It really opened their minds with how that all works. And again, if they would have said, oh, we don't want to talk to him, or oh, that's okay, that's not interesting, then we probably wouldn't have done that the next year.
Yeah.
My students, yeah, their passion, their want to learn more about the world is really why I just kept adding more and more to it each year.
Can you talk a little bit about Passport Adventures and the American Adventures series that you have?
When I was a few years, well, about 5, 6 years ago or so, I was having an issue with the current social studies program my school had been using. I didn't find that it was teaching kids enough about the world. And so every year I had my Chinese New Year unit, but that was really all I had. And that was what I was going off of to teach kids about other different things about the world. And so I eventually decided to start teaching kids a little bit about some of my trips. So every Friday, it just felt like a fun way to end the week on a Friday. Doing Friday afternoon, we finished all of our other work. So I wanted to show the kids just a few different places here or there. And so each week, I just started showing them a few pictures of different places. Take Paris, for example. There's Paris, there's the Eiffel Tower, this. And I just talked to them a little bit about that city or that country. And then I would have them just draw a picture of what they might like to do there. And then the pandemic happened. And in the 2020 and 2021 school year, I had students who were learning virtually from their home, and I had students that were in the classroom with me. And so my students that were learning virtually, they live streamed in with me for reading and for math. And I had to give them all of their other assignments for all their other subjects, and they had to do that all on their own. And I wanted them to learn about the world. I knew that they weren't going to be in the classroom with me and they weren't going to be able to hear my stories about these places. So I had to find a way to get it to them so that they can learn about the world and have the same experiences as my students were in the classroom. So that is really what started Passport Adventures. I started naming those lessons Passport Adventures, so they knew that every Friday, one of their assignments was to have their passport adventure from their home. And I started recording it. Since I was teaching kindergarten, I had to record myself a lot, giving the directions for my students because they couldn't read the directions on their own. And so I started getting used to myself talking to my students as if they were right there in front of me. And so then once we started traveling again more, I started making videos around the different places my husband and I go to. And I started talking to them as if my students were right there with me on the trip. And so just making them feel like it's a real thing, they're there. And so that's how Passport Adventures came to be. And now it's something where I create lessons everywhere we travel. Next month, I'm going to be traveling to London and Scotland with my husband. I'm going to be presenting at an early childhood conference there. And so I already have in my head the lesson that I'm going to create for London and then the one I'm going to create when we're in Scotland. And I'm going to talk to the students as if they're traveling right there along with me. So it's not just going to be, look, there's the not Eiffel Tower in London, but look, there's the Big Ben or the Tower Bridge. It's going to be like, boys and girls, take a look. Here is Big Ben, or this is the Tower Bridge. What do you guys think? Do you like it? And so just talking to them, just making them feel like they're actually there. In these lessons, the kids will pretend like they're actually packing for that trip. Again, I try to make it as interactive as possible, because if you make it interactive, then they're going to be excited about it. It's going to motivate them and they're going to want to learn more, and it's going to stick with them.
Yeah.
So when we travel to Cairo, Egypt, kids learn that in Egypt, they dress conservatively. And so in their imaginary suitcases, they need to pack clothing that's going to cover their shoulders and in their legs. And so you'll see kids pretending to fold things up and putting them in their imaginary suitcases. And then I do what I call 10 seconds of chaos. I tell them, okay, guys, now go ahead and pack anything else you think you might need. And so they'll pretend to throw in all these different items into their suitcases, anything from sunglasses to sunscreen to underwear to socks to shoes, cell phones, all these things. And then I say, okay, guys, zip it up. So then they'll zip up their suitcases, and then I make them put their suitcase down next to them. And so then we go on through the lesson. If they see something that they like, if they see a picture or video of a place that they think is interesting, they'll use their imaginary cameras and they'll pretend to take pictures, or they'll hold them like this and they'll pretend like they're taking pictures on their phone. And so we just go through the whole lesson talking about it, talking as if we're actually there. I have passports for them that they use, like pretend fake passports that they use. And then I have fake passport stamps and stickers that they get too. And so when they are done with that trip, they get a stamp in their passport, and that makes the lesson complete. But I also want them to learn too. I want students in the US to be proud of where we live and understand that there's so much beauty in our own country too. And so then I started creating American Adventures. And that is more about national parks and places in the US too, that they can also travel. I think that everybody, wherever you live, can find some beauty, something in the country that you want to learn more about and explore. And so American Adventures was my way of doing that, about teaching kids about places in the US. Then students will learn that they don't need their passport when traveling on an American adventure because we're staying in the US. And so they are also learning the difference then of when you need to use your passport versus when you don't need to use your passport when you travel.
Yeah, and how many kids have actually traveled and come back to you and talked about their experiences in relation to whatever they may have learned through these interactive lessons?
Oh my goodness. I think I'm getting goosebumps. I'm getting choked up just even thinking about it. I have, over the years, the most rewarding thing about doing Passport Adventures has been I've had parents tell me that their child now has a travel bucket list of places that they want to go. We live 3 hours away from Orlando, which is where Walt Disney World is. And so a lot of my students down here have all been to Walt Disney World. And it was one of my goals is to make students more aware of other places just other than Walt Disney World. And so now parents will say, now my child wants to go to Paris for their birthday instead of, but the sweetest thing in the world for me is that some of my former students have made me videos on their travels, either long after they've left my classroom or while they were a student in my classroom that year. And so I have had one student that comes to my mind. His name is Gio. Gio got to go to Costa Rica the summer after he was in my classroom. And I received videos from his mom that summer, and it's of Gio, and I'll hold my phone up for this. He's holding his phone like this in the video, and it's shaking like this and moving around. And he's telling me, hi, Mrs. De Pasquale, this is what it looks like in Costa Rica. Most of his footage was filming the sidewalks. And so I didn't really see a lot of Costa Rica, but he was walking on this, putting the camera down, trying to show me some different places. He took a picture of himself wearing a wool hat because it must have been chilly where they were at. They were up visiting a volcano or something. And so he told me that if I went to Costa Rica, I might need to wear a hat. And so his video was super sweet. And so I ended up doing a lesson that next year then of Costa Rica because he was in first grade and then in the next grade. And so he got to come back to the class then and then talk to my students about that. But another one of my students, after the year after he was in my class, he and his brother, they're from Nigeria. They went to go to Nigeria, and it was their first time flying in an airplane. And this video, to this day, I still have it saved. It's like, I will never, ever get rid of this video. He filmed the takeoff from the flight from Fort Lauderdale, and he was talking to me as if I was sitting next to him in the seat by him. And he was talking just like I do in the videos where I'm like, we're taking off, we're getting, and he was asking me questions in his video, and I can hear the excitement in his voice along with his brother who was next to him.
Okay, as an educator and creator, how do you use social media to connect with teachers and share your resources?
I love using social media. Instagram is the one that I use the most. I love it. I use Instagram for a few different reasons, a few different ways. I do use it to connect with other teachers. It's been a great way to showcase what goes on in my classroom on a typical Friday with Passport Adventures. I do have permission from the parents. I'm so thankful that throughout the years, my classroom parents have been super understanding and supportive of Passport Adventures, knowing that I use a lot of video footage just to help teach people about what to do. And so anytime you see pictures or videos of kids on Instagram, I have permission from their parents to share it. But I do use that, especially on Fridays with them, just so that others can see how you can use their imagination and still have fun and teach the facts too in the process. So I'll use Instagram for that. And then I also love sharing travel tips and advice on places around the world. So I often will, what I try to do is I try to have earlier in the week, I'll have content based on the place my students are going to be learning about later that week, but I'll share my own personal content from those trips and my recommendations. And then at the end of the week, you can see my students are then learning about that place. So that's
interesting. Yeah.
How did you?
It's also with social media, you have to use it responsibly. And as a creator, you obviously understand that. And the fact that you're an educator as well, it's interesting how you're able to combine the two. Any tips before we end the conversation on how educators can leverage social media to enhance their teaching or to share their own resources?
I think sometimes, like for the longest time, especially when social media first started coming out, like we all just started looking at it like it's this bad thing. Oh, we can't be on it. We need to be super careful about kids being on it and stuff. And I agree. I don't think kids should have social media and stuff at young ages for sure. But I do feel that there is such a incredible opportunity to connect with others. And so if I didn't use social media, I would not know a ton of fabulous content creators and teachers that are out there all sharing ideas. I think that we all have the opportunity to help each other become better. And so if we just keep all those ideas to ourselves, then no one else is benefiting. If I kept Passport Adventures just to myself and it was just this thing that only Mrs. De Pasquale's kindergarten class down here in Florida gets to do, then all these other kids that now use my curriculum, they wouldn't have that opportunity and they wouldn't learn that. And I think that it's fascinating to me how social media has made us so much more connected than ever before. Even last year, my husband and I, we were in Egypt and we had a tour guide taking us through the night markets in Cairo, and we ended up sitting down next to him and we had a coffee, and we just looked at each other and the tour guide said to us, he's like, "Oh, are you guys on Instagram?" "Yes, we're on Instagram." "Are you?" "Yeah." And so all three of us pulled out our phones, pulled up our Instagram, and boom, we just started following each other right away. And it was just fascinating to me how people who live on opposite sides of the world all have something in common and we can connect. And so now to this day, I still comment on his posts. I still recommend him to friends and family, and we still send each other messages here and there. And I just love that. I think we're meant to be connected. Humans are meant to share ideas with one another and be connected with each other. So social media has definitely been a great tool for that.
Thank you so much, Trisha. I really enjoyed listening to you. And I think the way you're trying to stimulate the kids into getting aware of how there are so many possibilities and opportunities, and there's so many different cultures all across the globe, and there's so much history, and how accessible it can be, and how you're teaching them to use that also to expand their imagination, expand their way of thinking. I think it's incredible. And yeah, no, good. And of course, I can see that you love to travel, which helps because then you bring in your experiences, and then it becomes far more real as well. Thank you. I've really enjoyed chatting with you and listening to all the stuff that you're doing.